Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the next of our Essential series. I'm Lottie, founder of the Jura Society, and today I'm delighted to invite Amy Blackwell, philanthropy and impact specialist, to explore the question, is strategic philanthropy the answer to the world's problems? I'm going to bring Amy on now, and she will do a little bit of an introduction on what she does and why she does it. Hi, Amy. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I know some of you who I've seen sign up for this, and a lot of new faces. So briefly, my background is that I worked with Merrill Lynch in the early 90s in a group that was working with families to do sort of all sorts of wealth planning. And my role was to look at legacy planning within families. And so I was looking at wealth as a tool for successions and bringing up next gen and making sure that people found a role to play within families. And naturally, conversations about philanthropy and making a difference started early in those conversations. And I've been fascinated by the way that it dovetails neatly wealth planning strategies and succession strategies for the last 30 years. So when I started thinking about your question about whether strategic philanthropy is the answer to these incredibly tough problems, I'm going to cop out my answer, which is pretty much yes, sometimes. I mean, it's not always the answer. And I think that by calling it strategic philanthropy, you are thinking about it in terms of when does it work best? When could it be more effective if delivered in a different way? Or when can you pair it alongside for-profit, impact-driven investments to get to the goal that you'd like to see in a family? So I guess in the instances where I think philanthropy is by far the best solution to a problem is probably in the role of funding for humanitarian issues. So if you think of reactionary issues, you've got conflict, you've got an epidemic, you've got a pandemic, you've got situations where people are coming in a reactive way and people are dying. And so think of MSF on the ground during Ebola, or circumstances when you're in refugee camps and you have displaced people and there is no structural system in place to help. The challenging thing with that is that it's very hard to track that intervention all the way through to impact. So if you think of you as a donor have given money, that is an input. So you've given it to the charity, that's your input. They take your money and they do something with it. So they help someone in a crisis, they are on the battlefield and they save a life. That's the output. What did they do with your money? Then there's an outcome. An outcome is what happened because they saved that life. Well, this is where it gets really tricky when it's a humanitarian effort, because oftentimes people come in, they're in a crisis, they help solve a problem, they save lives, they're an integral part of the solution, but then they move on to another crisis. The people they've saved move on in their lives. And then at that point, where's the follow-on? So if you're really driven by lots of data and understanding your impact and did it work, you have to accept that certain types of philanthropy is much harder to look in a long-term view of, well, what did it matter that you came in other than the obvious that you saved a life? And so on the opposite side of that is developmental philanthropy. So that's systems change and empowerment and battling climate change with drought-resistant crops, and those are much longer term. And in those cases, philanthropy sort of plays a different role. You can use the philanthropy to de-risk, test, find out if something in a pilot program works, that then could be scaled. You can use it to, if you're going to invest in something or you're going to have lending that is for charities that don't have collateral and can't get conventional bank loans, then it can do a lot of really creative things. But in the end, if you really want to say, I had sustainable impact, which means that I, the philanthropist, could walk away, the organization could walk away and leave people empowered, then in some cases, the for-profit sector is a better environment for that. Because if you are a charitable organization on the ground and you are handing out something to a community of people, then how do you leave? If you aren't empowering them to get those things themselves, or develop a skill, or be educated, or have more gender neutral acceptance, or help battle climate change that they may not have caused in the first place, then you can't ever leave. And so in those instances, helping build nascent markets into a market, helping people have microfinancing, helping people build businesses is giving them the lift. And, you know, the old adage of teach them to fish, not feed them a fish. So I think what happens is you have to be really strategic in understanding, what does good look like to you? What do you want to do with this wealth as a tool? And how are you going to know it worked? And what is realistic as far as the data is concerned that can come back to you to know whether it did in fact work?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the answer to the question is sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And your point really, really highlights the spectrum of philanthropy there. You've got effectively the A&E, response unit approach, and then you've got that holistic health approach. What are the tools that you can do to look after yourself? I'm just trying to, make a comparison there with, and actually that systems change element is crucial for long-term philanthropy. But again, it's that education piece. So how can we use wealth as a tool, let's say, to actually implement some of these changes?
Well, I think first of all, families need to really kind of start at the beginning and think about, what do they want to be known for? Are they a family that wants to be incredibly discreet and quiet with their giving, which is very common in the UK? Are they a family that wants to stand up on a stool and tell the world about how it has changed their life? That's a bit more of the American model. And there's room for all of it, and it's all really important. But I think you need to figure out what feels good for you and your family. And sometimes that goes all the way back to where the wealth was created. You think about if you were an entrepreneur in the 19th century and you made all of this money during the Industrial Revolution, you were working in a very community-driven way, right? You had a factory, you took care. I mean, there were quite a few people who had villages that were built for their employees. There was a philanthropic element to this family's heritage. So sometimes looking back to figure out what did we care about then can help a family look forward. It also can connect younger generations in the family to the sort of entrepreneurial side of the family, which is no longer maybe the driving force now that the wealth was created. So once you get an opportunity to really talk to families about how involved they want to be, do they want to volunteer? Do they want to see it on their doorstep? Or do they want to have the most impact for every pound that they give, which means they might operate in a developing country versus in Britain. So it's really a question of, will it matter more to you if you walk out in your community and see a difference? Or do you just want to know that your money went further and maybe you were able to affect more change in a place where it's less expensive to do it? But before you dive in and start just throwing money at things and spray and pray, it really is effective if you take back deep breath and have some help taking you on that journey. And then you can use the wealth in tools. You can invest some of it for good. You can do social lending. You can offset risk. You can pay for research that will help charitable organizations, and you can do grant making. So you can have all the touch points that make you more effective than you would be just from one stream.
Yeah. And I think actually looking at that the narratives of legacy as well, it is quite crucial, and particularly nowadays where sometimes families need to be a little bit more conscious over their reputation management as well when they are making any philanthropic decisions. Have you ever, is there anything that you would suggest or recommend a family do to help to mitigate any risks, personal risk? Perhaps there's a dodgy character in the family or something like that, and actually the family as a whole want to do good, but perhaps there's something there that, might, I don't know.
Well, I think it's an interesting thing because in today's world, reputation is an asset that you have to manage. Because of the internet, there is no hiding. The idea that you could just, choose not to deal with the media is no longer an option. So it's coming at it on both sides, because charitable organizations have faced lots of issues based on some of the high profile donors in the US that have come out of favor and are, charitable organizations are caught now with big lobbies with their names on it. And so charitable organizations are very keen to do lots of due diligence on the families that are giving to them. Families are looking the same way, because newspapers love putting up, horrible stories of things that have gone wrong within a charity, and they don't want to be listed as having been massive donors in the annual report for those organizations. And so it is really important. And part of working with someone who does this strategy work is the due diligence that goes into the matchmaking of a good donor alongside a good organization. And it's more than just, do they do a good job? There's a real personality fit as well. And I find that younger people are taking this wealth very, very seriously. I mean, this idea that young people are all, racing around in supercars and not caring at all about the world. I mean, that's just not true. It's not what I'm seeing at all. I mean, people are feeling a tremendous sense of duty and responsibility with wealth that they have been handed, and they are working very hard to have it matter and have it make a difference. And so I think they are very keen to get good advice and to learn from each other. And I think there's a lot of appetite for peer-to-peer conversations that will give people an opportunity to, learn from each other and collaborate and give collectively to things. So I think it's a really exciting time. I think you just need to think of philanthropy as not just one little silo. It's more of a conversation about wealth as a tool, and then figuring out which tools you're going to use and how.
Yes, and I think that next gen narrative is so powerful as well, because sometimes the direction that exists might not be the direction that they want to continue with. And I think from what you're saying is, philanthropy doesn't have to be static. It's continuously growing, and it's moving and evolving. And so, like you would have a family charter to sort of override, it's almost like you would have a philanthropy charter with the family, which I'm sure you would do, but setting out what we as a family believe in and making sure everybody is on board, which I suppose is one of the benefits of having somebody like yourself there and getting advice on a strategy at the start, is aligning that so that it has long-term impact.
Well, I worked with a family recently where it was an American living over here who had, her mother and grandmother had been very well-known philanthropists on the East Coast in the US, and they funded the arts at a significant level. And her children were in their 40s, and they didn't think that philanthropic capital should go to the arts. They just felt like the world is falling apart. There were really important things, and that was not what to spend money on. And so there was lots of tension in the family. And she came to me and said, we need to make a change, or this entire philanthropic spirit in our family from generations is going to die with my children. And she's like, I don't agree with their view about the arts, but this is their view, and this is my family. So what we ended up doing was going to a top engineering university in the US and speaking to their mechanical engineering department and saying, if we were to fund 2 PhD candidates and we would basically just tell them that they needed to build a prototype that solved some climate change related issue. So we weren't micromanaging the university. We weren't telling them who to accept. It would be a student they had already chosen to bring in, but we were giving each of them an additional $100,000 for their PhD period of time, but then also putting some experts from venture capital on their team so that the whole time they were building a prototype, they were thinking about scaling. They were thinking about, okay, if this works, then how do we go to the next step? How do we, and this was super exciting for the young people in the family. Geographically, it ended up in the place where the family had supported in the past. So it felt like a continuity. And the family then, from the endowment of the foundation, have the ability to invest in this prototype for climate change should they be inspired by what the student comes up with. And so sometimes the answer isn't to, throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's to think about the ethos of the family and leaving it better than you found it, and realizing that the focus maybe needs to shift and change to keep the passion going in the family. And in the end, the client was thrilled because her children were happy and excited, and their children were excited. And so you were able to unlock that for another generation without, completely taking the history of the family off the table.
I think that's brilliant as well. And the engagement piece too will, across the generations, create more impact in terms of, you've got that VC element of it, the investing element of it, the actual problem that they're trying to solve, but actually then it becoming some, a recurring theme that they can continue with. And something like that, as you have just described, it's not easy to configure, which is where you would need to have the connections, the access, but also the drive to actually pull all these pieces together and deliver that beautiful menu of options for a client. Because as we all know, philanthropy is not easy, and there is a reason these problems have not yet been solved. And it is not just about money, it's about implementation. And I think that's something where, when you have strategic advice, it's the implementation bit that will help you get from A to B. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, you're speaking to the choir here. I just think that the value of someone like me working with a family is that we have seen around corners. We can anticipate potential potholes before you step in it. We can help you. If you may say you care about a specific cause, but there might be 50 organizations that would all be considered good, but they may not be right for you. And that comes from really knowing you and your family and what would feel good, what kind of interaction you want with that organization, but also understanding and helping the organization better communicate with you. Because you want to set it up for success. I mean, by the time we've got a grant that's ready to go out, it's been a matchmaking. And so it's just as important to me that the family be a good donor than that the charitable organization be a good recipient. And sometimes charities are running around with their pants around their ankles. They can't get their work done. They've got too much going on, and stuff slips between the cracks. And they don't mean to have terrible donor management, but sometimes it happens. And so it's a lot easier for me to go to them and say, that's not okay. That is, you cannot behave that way, than it is for a client. Because what the client will do is just walk away and say, that was a terrible organization, I'm never giving to them again. And so, you need that person in the middle who can balance what's good look like on both sides of the table and really bring together opportunities that they wouldn't maybe have otherwise found on their own. And it's incredibly joyful. I mean, it is so much fun, especially when you work with families that have young children. I mean, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids. when they get that fire in their belly and that excitement, it permeates all the way up through the family. It can overcome lots of conflicts in families when everyone gets excited about what the children care about.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and that element of mediation. It's almost, I think it's the same whenever there is a duality of needing and wanting and having to mediate discussions is a key skill, and it's the same with angel investors and startups. And one person's got the ideas and they're running off and they want to do it, the other person's like, whoa, I'm not too sure. So you have to be the one to say, no, look, this is what the benefit is, and guide them through that as a professional parent and say, it's going to be okay. Look, don't throw the balls out the car yet, and all of those things. One thing I do want to ask is, which are the particular areas of interest that you're seeing in terms of where the giving is going, and then perhaps where do you feel that might need a little bit more of attention, perhaps?
Well, I think climate is getting a lot of attention. I think that the increase in poverty as a result of the pandemic has gotten a lot of attention. And in developing parts of the world that are being more negatively impacted by climate and food insecurity, and being what they're, climate migrants, because they simply can't farm anymore where they are, or it's a drought, or those things are really getting a lot of attention. The challenge with a lot of that is that a lot of the solutions are coming in a for-profit model. And so when you think about that investment spectrum, there's a section that is impact investing, where you want a financial return that's near market rate alongside an impact return. But then there's also what you would call impact first investments. So they're still for profit, but you're leading with impact and you'd like a bit of return, right? And so in that space where you're in some of the more nascent markets, and you're in some of the issues where you really need to empower people with lots of skills alongside investment, that fits in that spectrum. So it's not philanthropic giving, it's not impact investing for market rate returns, but it is a for-profit investment. And so I think having conversations that you mitigate risk then. So if you do have that entrepreneur who, wants their whole profile to be sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you're going to also have that family member whose gut clenches every time that person opens their mouth, right? So what you have to do is think, just like you would in an investment portfolio, about a strategic asset allocation and risk to diversify across. And you do that the same way when you plan for your impact strategy. So you put some grant making in things where it's a done deal, it's going to work. And then you try some things that might have outsized impact, but they might not work. But if they don't work, there's a lot to be learned from it. So, you build a portfolio just like any other wealth, and you use different tools for different strategic parts of that. And that's where you can get the family excited, because regardless of where you sit on that risk line, something in that portfolio speaks to you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, this might be a stupid question, but I love stupid questions for myself. Does it matter where you are in the world, and what maybe are the complexities to giving sort of in different areas of the world? Does that even make sense to the question?
No, it's a great question, actually, because the thing is, I would not give legal advice on jurisdiction. So if someone is deciding between, a Daphne United States, a charity here, a foundation in Guernsey, or a foundation in Switzerland, that's really going to come down to how each jurisdiction has the tax policy and the giving. And in some cases, certain donors don't want to be in highly transparent places, and not because they're nefarious, but just because they want to be more private. And some people use donor advised funds for specifically that reason. Other people think that the legitimacy comes from a really transparent place. So somewhere like the Charities Commission, where trustees and everything are listed on the Charities Commission website, that is appealing. So there's something for everyone. It just depends on how involved you want to be. So once the structuring piece, the build the house, that should come after the conversations, because you want to make sure you build the right house. And if you don't know what you want to do with the impact money, then you could build a foundation or a community interest company or some other structure and then say, oh, this is great, now I want to do this. And then your lawyers are going to say, I'm sorry, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And then you will have spent all of this money building the wrong house. So even if you don't do anything from the deploying capital perspective, you should do the legacy and strategy thinking for what the purpose of the money, once it crosses the philanthropic line, what do you want to do with it, to make sure that when you go to the lawyers, you say, you tell me what structure, but it must be able to do these things.
Yeah.
And then it's money well spent.
And I think that's where it's really key, is not wasting money when you're trying to do good. It sounds so simple, but it's clearly not.
No, it's not easy. And, there's a very famous quote from Aristotle that basically talks about, how difficult it is to give away money properly. And, Bill Gates has said the same thing. It was every bit as hard to think about the Bill Gates Foundation as it was to build his company. And so, it is a highly professional, highly strategic sector, and it deserves the respect of being a profession just like any other private client advisor. Because if it's done well, it is unbelievably impactful for a family. I mean, it is joyful, and it should be joyful, but it's not easy.
No, but nothing, worthwhile is ever easy, is it?
No, it's true. And it is fun. It is fun. And people learn a lot about themselves during the journey, and about their family members, and especially about their children, whether they're adults or young. I mean, you all of a sudden you see that flicker in someone's eye, and as a parent, it's exciting.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Amy. Before we wrap up, could you just share a couple of, feeder thoughts or anything like that for any families or individuals who might be watching this, who want to know what to take for the next step if they want to start exploring this further?
Well, I think the first thing that you need to do is make sure that you're prepared to be honest. I mean, it's, you're not all going to agree about what the most important thing that's happening in the world. And so what it means is that you need to be prepared to be a good listener, and you need to be prepared to speak your mind. And in some families where you have the dominant people and the people who swallow, what I find oftentimes is that the people who don't say much and swallow things have incredibly insightful things to say. And so what you need to do as a family is get the right person in front of your family to help facilitate those conversations that oftentimes can't happen without a stranger in the room. And so that stranger comes in, and that person can really help create some balance, where the people who have something really interesting to say but tend to bite their tongue have an opportunity to have the social capital to join the conversation in a meaningful way. So I think that but you have to prepare for that, right? Because you're overcoming family roles, and we all do it. I mean, even if we know the role we have isn't the one we want, we do it. And so it's a journey for families. It's a really meaningful one, but it is a journey.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Amy. It's been really insightful. And I think, if anybody has any questions at all, please do reach out. I'm very happy to connect you to Amy directly, or you can contact her yourself. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you next week. But once again, Amy, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was great. Take care.
Lovely. Thank you. See you later. Bye-bye.